really, how can we best treat our lands that are still being utilized? We work really closely in partnership with Western, with different research activities, different producers. And some of the things that we've got teed up this year, I think would be a great opportunity to collaborate. My two fellows are going to tell you guys a little bit more about two specific options, but first and foremost, we're investigating developing a native plant nursery, primarily one geared at restoration species, but currently when we are working on restoration efforts in the valley, we tend to purchase plants from pretty far away. They're not always available, it's hard to overwinter. There's a lot of reasons why we might want to have local supplies for diversity too. So that's a project that we're going to be spending a lot of time and energy evaluating in the coming year. And we're also working on our own restoration projects and looking at different ways where we can really emphasize the role of native plants. And we have everybody's favorite issue. So we've also got some weed mitigation that we're doing. Since we have wetland conservation easements and we co-manage with the NRCS, we both have kind of restrictions on what we can do, but also opportunities to explore new things. So we're going to try to save a lot of time so I can finally figure out which milk veg is out of carbons. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our two fellows. See if you guys just a quick intro on two opportunities we have coming up this spring.
Thank you, Julie. So, thanks, Julie. She's amazing, by the way. Really good chance to chat with her. She's just kicking butt. It's great.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Megan Looker. Megan's fine. I'm a Western student. I'm in the MSc and the MEF programs. We've been those. But yeah, so Julie mentioned there are a couple of upcoming events we're having. So we're still trying to like nail down the dates and everything, which is pretty tricky. But one of them is a cottonwood production day. So we have some recruitment over at the ranch. They're still pretty small. We also have a fever, at least one. So one of them is in danger. So we're gonna make sure trying to like fence those young cottonwoods just to make sure that they're not taken down. They can grow up. So that'll be happening around mid-June. TBD. We'll get back to Lynn. We'll see all that done. Yeah, we'll be mulching to keep moisture in, staking if it's really windy, caging them just in general because fever. So if you're interested in that, keep that in mind. We'll also have a lime transect grass ID day, some point around July 15th. Again, trying to nail down the date on that because we haven't used them on land. Dates get tricky. But yeah, so that should be pretty fun because I think I remember quite. I remember somebody was really interested in doing transect days every year, so waiting for that. And please feel free to reach out to us. We have information in the back, so you can email if you want to subscribe to the newsletter, and then just like a little info card. And you're also really welcome to reach out to either of us.
Yeah, I can talk real quick a little bit more about some of our weed projects. My name is Danny. I'm another fellow, as has been said. We're going to have at least 2 weed opportunities coming up. One in either April or May to hit Canada thistle. That one tends to come up a little earlier, so we kind of want to do some mitigation with that as soon as we can get out on the ranch. And then one more midsummer to get a population of musk and Scotch thistle taken care of. So if you're interested in coming and learning about mitigating some of these species, we avoid the use of herbicide on our property. So this will all be like getting your hands really dirty and hopefully not too much. But helping us do some mitigation and maybe a little bit of restoration, and also learning what you can do with these weeds rather than just walk them and toss them to the dumpster. Yeah, so stay tuned to figure out when those will be, because we still are.
Thank you so much. You'll communicate with me and then I will get the word out. Okay, that's who we like to do. Sure. And Jenny, this is Jenny from our group. I have to thank her for helping us set this up as Zoom. Most of the Colorado Native Plant Society reviews are offered via Zoom. And as a result, we're working the kinks out right now. Okay, so we hope to do that. So if we have chairs, any food that you want before we begin our program.
acting vice president, and I just said, okay, I'll be president. If anybody else wants to be president. Kathy Carr, you know, we've got space for you to be president if you would like. Not yet. Okay, she's saying no. All right. With that, then I'd like to get started with our program. Dr. Robin Bingham has been nice enough to actually come here and speak to us about some milk vetches. And I could go on and on about Dr. Robin, but she's professor of biology here with a great knowledge of the botany in this valley, and I great love by her students. And she likes horses. So, anyways, here's Dr. Robin Bingham with the genus Astragalus. Okay.
Thank you so much, and I guess I just hit the space button to.
Yes,
The bar. Oh, the arrow.
or the bar.
Okay, I'll figure it out as we go along. So anyway, yes, my name's Robin Bingham. I've been here at Western for a while, since the late 90s. I think one of my first classes, I was in the pit. I don't know if any of you remember the pit at before they renovated Hearst, these great lecture halls that were, yeah, anyway. Wonderful blackboards that, you know, you had multiple blackboards that you could play with. Anyway, I invited Kim to give a presentation to my class. That was like in 1997. Yeah, so that was when I met.
And did I wear something black and had chalk all over me?
Yeah, I always had chalk all over me in those days too. Anyway, so I teach our Rocky Mountain Flora class. And I teach our general botany class. And then I teach a whole bunch of other things too. But probably the flora class is one of my favorites. It's gone through sort of a bunch of iterations. But anyway, that's kind of a little bit of my story. I am by no means an expert in Astragalus. I am just kind of interested in the genus. And so I'm going to present a little bit of scientific work. Most of this is not a very technical talk. Really just, you know, about some cool species in this genus that we have here in Colorado. But I will be presenting work that a lot of other people have done. Right, so I need to acknowledge all those folks, and I will do that as we go through the presentation. And I also have to tell you that none of these pictures are mine. I'm not a very good photographer, and as you can kind of see from these two pictures, actually are two stars in the Gunnison Basin are Astragalus microcynthus, which is skiff milk vetch over here on the left, and then Gunnison milk vetch on the right. Neither one of them are terribly photogenic. So I would say especially the skiff milk vetch, it's just really hard to capture it and really get a sense for what it's like out there. So the folks who have taken these pictures, I've gotten pictures from Colorado Natural Heritage Program and other researchers and some from my former grad student as well. So anyway, just want to make sure that folks understand that I'm not an expert and I didn't take these pictures. Okay, let's see if I can figure out stuff. Wasn't that true? Okay, Jenny, how do I make it go forward? Is there an arrow? Forward here. This one. Okay, I'll just have to click on. Okay, I'll try. I'll try next time. Hopefully it works. Okay, so I did want to start with a land acknowledgement. So indigenous peoples have lived, prayed, loved, laughed, and raised children in the Gunnison and Uncompahgre country. The Utes and their many distinct bands are primary among many groups who historically had ties to this land. Western Colorado University humbly acknowledges the sacred sites, hunting and gathering grounds, spiritually important mountains, botanical resources,
special buttes, and other places of significance for the indigenous peoples. Members of the Western community hereby express respect for the Utes and their ongoing connections to this land. And I hope we can all sort of learn from that tradition in terms of our connections to the land. Okay, Astragalus. So Astragalus is a genus in the pea family. How many of you knew that? Okay, good. You guys are all mostly plant people. So the Fabaceae, formerly known as the Leguminosae. So this is the pea family. And it's a crazy genus. It's the largest genus in the world, with 3,200, roughly 3,270 species within this single genus. And you need to just take a minute to sort of wrap your head around that. That is a lot of diversity within that one genus. So it's really interesting in that respect. It also has a lot of rare and endemic species, right? And that is probably, tied to that large number. So there are, and this is a whole field of study, interesting, genetic mechanisms, breeding mechanisms, patterns of gene flow and such that lead to isolation, that lead to this greatly speciose genus. One thing that probably contributes to this great diversity of species is that there are a lot of edaphic or soil specializations. And so that probably contributes to isolation that has led to some of these unique species. In particular, some are able to live on selenium-rich soils or selenium-contaminated soils. And one of those actually is Astragalus osterhudii, which you see there, which is one of Colorado's endangered astragalus species. So it's federally listed as endangered. I'll talk about it more in a little bit. But it is what's referred to as a selenium hyperaccumulator. So some of these plants can just tolerate these toxic soils. Others, like osterhudii, are actually able to accumulate those materials in their tissues. And it's a problem for ranchers because those plants are toxic to horses and cattle and livestock in general. So it can be a big problem. I'm not sure exactly how that sort of plays into the conservation of this species. That's a whole question that I didn't have time to really dig into, but it would be an interesting one to look into. Another interesting thing, because it's in the pea family, these are capable of symbiotic association with bacteria that can fix nitrogen. Okay, so that may also contribute to their ability to live in nutrient-poor soils, and potentially leading to some isolation and specialization as well. So they're pretty interesting. Let's see. Astragalus. How many of you knew that was an ankle bone? It's actually an ankle bone. We have one in our ankle. So you find it in all tetrapods. But in particular, I think in the past, the astragalus bone in sheep was used as dice. So like way back, they collected these bones and they would put symbols on the sides and then use them as dice to play games. So the idea or the story, and to what extent this is true, I'm not exactly sure, is the story is that the seeds in the legumes and the pods, when you shake those pods, it's reminiscent of shaking dice in a cup. So supposedly that's where the name came from. Astragalus is Greek for ankle bone. Linnaeus named the genus. So, you know, we need to dig back into botanical nomenclature to really, you know, find out all the details. But it goes way back to Linnaeus. So this genus was named back in the 1700s. How many of you are familiar with, so Astragalus is milk veg, that's the one on the left. And how many of you are familiar with loco wheat, Oxytropis on the right? Okay, so those two genera, you know, they're very different. Oxytropis does not have nearly as many species as Astragalus, but it's just a kind of a fun identification character that I go to just like immediately to look at the keel of a pea plant. So the keel is a classic pea plant, of course. Folks recognize that with the banner and the wings. And then this is the keel, which is actually formed from two petals that enclose the reproductive structures, like the stamens and the pistil. And in Astragalus, it's a nice blunt tip. But in Oxytropis, it's got this very prominent beak. And it was kind of hard to find a really good picture of that, but it's just a great go-to ID. I'm like, okay, is this Astragalus or not? And if it's got that beak, then it's not. And most of the time it doesn't have the beak. And then you have to deal with Astragalus, which is this huge genus, and it's not actually very easy. Yeah. So how many of you are familiar with that trick? Yeah, it's kind of a fun thing to look for. And we have loco wheat. I think this is ours, which is Oxytropis lambertii. It grows around here and up by Signal Peak. Okay, but if you find a blunt keel and you end up in the genus Astragalus, you better hope you have the fruit. Because if you have the fruit, keying it out and identification to species should not be too difficult. But without the fruit, it can be a real challenge. So what's really interesting is that one of the botanists who did some of the main work in this genus noted that although the flowers of all these different Astragalus species are very similar and can be really hard to key them to species just based on their floral traits, if you have the fruits are quite different species to species, whether it's size, and I just put a few of them up here to give you an idea of that, whether it's size, some of them, well, maybe not that around here, but big, or they're inflated, or they're hard or papery or hairy, or they have these crazy mottled patterns. So very, very distinct fruits that are really key to identifying to species. And so these are just a few to give you a little idea of that. These are some of our Colorado species of Astragalus. We have a lot of endemism in the state. This is a list that I got from Jennifer Ackerfield's newest edition. of the flora of Colorado. The list, it's a little bit varies depending on kind of what source you're looking at. But that's quite a list. And the map, I couldn't find it. So the map just shows a few of them. I'll point out our two unique species, Astragalus anisis and Astragalus microcybus right there. So yeah, so we have quite a lot of endemism here in the state as well, which is really good. Pretty interesting.
Meaning they're only found here.
Yeah, oh, thanks. I should probably clarify that because that's an important concept. So endemics have a very limited geographic range. So they occur in one small area globally. That's the only place they occur. So these species, yeah, they're unique to our state. Or maybe, I think Schmolii, which I can't even read these, maybe gets into western New Mexico for that fourth word. Yeah, so that's what endemism means. Endemism and rarity aren't equivalent, right? So you can be endemic but locally common, which is true of our Gunnison milkvetch, which we'll get to here in a second. So Gunnison milkvetch is everywhere out there. I couldn't believe that what I was seeing was Gunnison milkvetch because it's so common. So yeah, so you can be endemic but locally common. You can also be endemic and locally rare, and that is the case with our other one, the skiff milkvetch. So in that case, it is very localized, and its populations, as you'll see, I'll talk about it, just fluctuate dramatically from year to year. Any other questions? Okay, so I thought I would just start with our federally endangered ones. This is Astragalus osterhudii, which is Kremling milkvetch, located up near the town of Kremling, within an 8.1 mile radius, right? So the geographic extent of that species is very, very limited. I do not have the details about when it was listed as endangered, but it did pass through all those hoops, is listed as endangered. And the major threat to it are off-road vehicles, which are also a threat to the habitat and the habitat of its primary pollinator. So that is one of our rare ones.
Where is it found? Like, is it found in sage or is it?
It is found in sage. Yeah, let me see if I can go back. Yeah, that habitat is but this is a selenium accumulator. So it is found in those particular types of soils.
Is the ground probably also in those soils, or is it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if the ground bumblebee actually nests in those selenium type soils or not. So great question. I don't know if bumblebees can tolerate that or not. I kind of have a thing for botanists, historical, and so I've included some of that here in this talk as well. Especially with these, rare ones or our special ones. So, and it also gives you some insight into their names. Interesting. So this was Astragalus osterhudii was named after the guy who found it. And he was a guy. They're not all guys. But this was a botanist who worked back in the early 1900s It was discovered and collected in 1905 at Silver Springs, up there, Grand Canyon, I think I call it. Okay, another of our federally endangered ones is Astragalus humilimus, which is the Mancus milkgutch. This coming spring break, we are headed down to that area. It's probably too early to see it, but you never know. I mean, that's a lot lower. Love to see it. So it's native to the Four Corners region, and it's got to be one of the more photogenic ones. It's really pretty spectacular. It is found on these rimrock ledges, so might be suitable for some like cliff exploration. I'm looking at my husband right now because he likes the rock climb. Do some cliff botanizing. Actually, I don't think it's on vertical cliffs, but and so the threats to this species have to do with oil and gas exploration and the associated infrastructure that's being built. And this one is listed as federally endangered. I think those are the only two of all the Astragalus. I don't even know how many Astragalus there are in the state. I can't remember. I looked it up. But we have 2 that are endangered and then 12 that are endemic. So Astragalus schmollii, if I'm pronouncing that right. This one is not listed, but it has been considered in the past for listing. This one's Schmoll's milkgutch is its common name. And this one is endemic to Montezuma County, so also sort of down there in the Four Corners region. And it's only found on Chapin Mesa in Mesa Verde National Park. So it has a very limited geographic distribution, and I think it has limited population numbers. Studies have demonstrated that populations are relatively stable, and so it has not been granted any kind of federal protection. But there are threats, and there was a fire a number of years ago. Well, you guys remember the Mesa Verde fire? Can't remember how long ago that was now, but that threatened these populations. I think some of that area burned that included them. It is also threatened by invasive species, including some of those that we mentioned. So musk thistle, and of course our favorite plant to hate, cheatgrass. So definitely problem. And Astragalus schmollii was first collected by Alice Eastwood. So Alice Eastwood is was a really interesting botanist. She first collected that plant in 1890. So that was the time period in which she was working. She has quite an interesting history. Her mother died when she was very young. When she was 14, she came out to live with her father in Denver. And she just became, obsessed with wildflowers and plants, and did a lot of exploration at a very young age. She taught high school for a while, and excuse me, she published one of the first floras of kind of the Front Range regions, which is very interesting. And then she eventually moved to San Francisco and became very active in conservation and worked for the California Academy of Sciences as their curator. While she was there in San Francisco, that was the time of the San Francisco earthquake and fire, which destroyed the collection. Yeah, but she was able to save the type specimens. So an herbarium, right, is a plant collection. dried pressed plants. And type specimens are like the definitive specimen for that species. So when you are trying to decide what a species is, is this in fact Schmollii or whatever, you go, the type specimen is the mod. So they're super valuable, incredibly valuable specimens. And she was able to save over 1,000 of those before the fire came through. So the earthquake hit, she went into the museum, over all the rubble. And apparently what she did was she bundled up the type specimens and lowered them in her apron off of the balcony to save them. So remarkable and brave and just really important person in the California history of plants. And also importantly, at that time, type specimens were just filed in other herbaria. They were just filed with their particular group. So they were scattered throughout. But she had, as curator, had started a new approach where she kept all the type specimens in their own cabinets, separate. And because she did that, she was able to save the type specimens. Nothing else, but she was able to save the type specimens. Huge, very lots of foresight there. She was very prolific. She published over 310 scientific articles and authored 395 species names. There are currently 17 species named for her, as well as 2 genera. So Eastwoodia, now I can't remember what it is. Oh, it's in the Astragalus. So it's a sunflower. And then Alistiella, which is a phlox. It's in the Polemoniaceae. So 2 genera named after her as well. So very interesting and accomplished. And here's just some more pictures of her. I just think she's so cool. She was a successful botanist, and she was also a fierce conservationist. At that time, she was very involved in the preservation of Muir woods, as well as some other groves of redwoods in California. She did a lot of very important work.
Yeah.
Yeah, you like the hat?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So a little bit more about Astragalus Schmollii, so I'm not sure. It is actually named for Hazel Schmoll, who was another Colorado botanist. She was the second to document this Astragalus species back in 1925. And she served as the Colorado State botanist from 1919 to 1925. Okay, you can't read that. But it says Astragalus annesis. Okay, so Astragalus annesis. So now we're going to dive in. Okay. Now we're going to dive in to our 2 special milk vetches. So Astragalus annesis is the first. This is Gunnison milk vetch. So it is a local endemic, as I've already mentioned, whose global distribution is limited to here. To here, around us, right? So it doesn't get up very down to the sagebrush. It's a sagebrush plant. The Natural Heritage Program here in Colorado lists it as, and I'm not very good at these designations, but G2S2, which means it's a sensitive species because of its global distribution, because its global distribution is so limited. I thought it was interesting that the US Forest Service doesn't currently list it as sensitive, although they did prior to 2003. So I'm not sure, that's kind of an interesting thing, I'm not sure why it switched.
Yeah, and that's something that, that we can work on here, because we do have a conservation committee at Colorado Plant Society that can help and instruct recommend regions to do that. But it might be the distribution and elevation too. I'm not, you might address that, but it seems like a lower elevation plant.
Yeah, it's it's Gunnison. So,
But it's something that this group could possibly work on and try to convince them to do something.
Yeah.
Get back to the 2003 status.
yeah, and just it'd be interesting to know sort of what the thought process was that they went through to remove it. However, BLM does list it, so that's good. And I think it's mostly on BLM land, most likely. So you're gonna see these next two pictures, and you'll see why I say it's not very photogenic. I could not find good pictures. These are good pictures. These are the fruits. They're very globose and kind of have this pink blush on them. How many of you have seen it? It's all right. Super. I mean, you're out there, and it's early. And I tell you, if this weather keeps up, it's going to be out like a month ahead. It's it's really crazy how warm it is. But it's one of the first to come up. And it's just all the things. Anybody have any other thoughts? I don't have a whole lot of information about Astragalus anesis. I had a student work on it way back in like the late 90s. Just sort of out there doing some pollination. We found some interesting holes in the fruit, so there may be some seed predation going on. I think there's definitely some room for some interesting algae work there.
And I'm thinking that with this group now, maybe there is a person that might be more interested in finding out, okay, when does it bloom, and related to temperatures and those kinds of things too. So that's a possibility. Yeah.
You're interested.
Like I need some. You got enough
Like you
going on.
need something else to do. Yeah, these are the horrible pictures. See, they're all kind of out of focus. You don't think of yourself. The colors are really different. So I think that might just be the quality of the one on the left that's contributing to that color. I think that color on the right is fairly true. Would you guys agree with me? Yeah, they're sort of purple pink. All right. So now here is our skiff milk bench. This is Astragalus microcembus, which means small boat. And the small boat, you can see the small boat is the fruit over here. Sorry, on the right, they're tiny. They're half a centimeter, quarter centimeter. They're just absolutely teeny weeny, and the flowers similarly small. So these, I believe both of these are pictures that were taken by my former grad student, Bronwyn Taylor, and she is an excellent photographer. So we take her for those. This again is kind of shows you how it's hard to capture. That's just sort of a tangle. But these plants can actually get pretty substantial. Most of them are very small, relatively small, I guess I should say. Lynn, would you say they're incredibly hard to spot?
They're very difficult to see. But once you get it in your head, you see more and more and more.
Yeah. Yeah,
And they tuck themselves into things too.
yes. Yeah, so, we should do a field trip.
Yeah.
To go look at them, when they're out, probably in July or something. Once you get the search image, it is easier to find them. They tend to associate with sagebrush, so they'll be growing up underneath sagebrush or some other, type of vegetation. They're kind of the same color, their leaves are kind of the same color as sagebrush. So they sort of blend in, so that makes them a little bit hard to see. They have these reddish stems. Yeah. But there's a lookalike that also has reddish stems that you can confuse it with potentially. Yeah, so they're tricky to find out there in the field, and over a period of a few years, late, like, when did I get back? 2017 to 2021, something like that. I had a grant to go out and try to find more populations, and it's very difficult to do. But we could all do that too, go do some surveys.
Where are they found approximately? Like what are?
I have a map. Oh, but I'll show you just in just a second. I'll show you this map. But anyway, so what I was getting at is typically you see them and they're sort of small and they're hanging up in the other bushes. But there's this one population where they were really large plants, low, always kind of low, but it's like a meter across, which is about probably what that is getting to be. So they can be kind of remarkably big if the growing conditions are good. Okay, here's another botanist. This is the fellow, Rupert Barnaby, who worked at the New York Botanic Gardens. He was the one who discovered Astragalus microcybus here in Gunnison County back in 1945. And he specialized in the family Fabaceae and did a lot of work with the genus Astragalus. So he was the person we can thank to sort of bringing this to our attention. He lived from 1911 to 2000 and is known as one of the most productive taxonomists of the 20th century. He published pages. So I don't know, he published 7,676 pages. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but that's a lot. And described 1,250 new taxa. So he was just incredibly prolific and just very dedicated, and sounded like quite an interesting person. He was an avid rock gardener. I just found this out, and was involved in, I'm gonna forget the actual name, but like there's anybody familiar? There's a rock garden society, right? Like a global thing. Well, my grandparents were in that, and they were really active. My grandparents lived in Boulder, and my grandmother had a beautiful rock garden. And so I was just wondering if they ever crossed paths. That would be interesting. Unfortunately, I can't ask. But anyway, so he was an interesting person and was the first to find it. This is a map of his collections in Utah and Colorado, which I thought was cool. He and his associates. So here we are, right? So this is probably Astragalus microcybus right there in that corner where we are. That's a lot of collecting. It's a very interesting country as well. Okay, so Astragalus microcybus. It's a narrowly restricted endemic, found only here. I'm going to show you some maps in just a second. The population size is hard to really get a handle on. It's estimated as maybe around 100,000 individuals. And the number of above ground plants varies. So the number of plants that you can count varies dramatically from season to season. Okay, so you can go out one year and find a lot of them and they're all flowering and they're looking amazing. And then the next year, there are none. Okay, so that has been tied due to work that the Denver Botanic Gardens has done. They've been tracking it for over 25 years. They've been doing a demographic study. And so they have been able to figure out that this drastic decline is, and then the really good years are tied to how much snow we get and how hot and dry the springs are. So it's interesting to think about what we might be likely to see this year out there. We kind of had the snow out at Hartman's, but now it's going. We didn't. Yeah, so hard to say. So those declines in populations have been documented after really dry winters and usually warm and dry springs. And so because of that, it is considered very vulnerable to climate change, because that's just gonna less precipitation, potentially warmer temperatures. So the majority of its habitat is in areas where there's a lot of livestock grazing. And so that is one of the concerns. We did actually document a lot of cows out of Hartman's walking through some of the populations with potential herbivory by cows. So there are management protocols in place. I mean, they put drift fences, which are meant to sort of get the cows to go a certain direction, but they don't actually fence them out of the populations that are out of apartments. So we do know that grazing potentially is a threat. Recreation potentially also a threat, but as we all know, the trails apartments are keep stay on the trails. And they are pretty good at Gunnison trails at getting botanists out there to look for it when they propose new trails. But we need to stay on them about that. Make sure that is managed well. So yeah, so these are just some pictures of where you find it, what it kind of looks like out there, familiar to all of us. And here's that. So I wish so you see us way up there in the top right hand corner of Gunnison. And if you go to the caves, so how many you know where the caves is? Caves is. And you go up past the turn to Cottonwoods. Right, that's where Cottonwoods is. You go past the turn to Cottonwoods, and you keep going up that way. Some of the populations are up in there. So kind of where we cross country ski. And then they're also sort of further back and down a little bit closer to South Beaver Creek. But definitely just sort of right off the trails where people are mountain biking and hiking and all that kind of stuff. So, and then there's this population over here along, it's actually above Savoia Creek. And that one is a kind of an adventure to get to. It's pretty, you go up, if I can remember, I haven't been there for a while, up 9 Mile Hill, and then you go in on those dirt roads, and then you have to know exactly where to turn, and then you walk down to basically down to the creek, Savoia Creek, and that's where that is, and that is where we saw those really big plants. But yeah, so hopefully that kind of makes sense to you for where it is. Yeah.
Is there any specific, like, geologic rock that it grows in? Like, this Harmon's, is that granite, and then
Yeah,
Cedar Creek is probably not.
no, I think it's similar. I think it is similar. Yeah, it doesn't have, there's no specific soil distinct from what's, basically in the Hartman's area where you find it in particular. So it doesn't seem to have any distinct soil association.
How about the aspect? Is that a hundred?
Maybe a little. Maybe they're a bit more on north facing aspects, north to maybe west facing aspects, but maybe that has to do with soil moisture.
The moisture of the soil is making the ones in Sequoia Creek larger as compared to the ones in the Park area.
I mean, that's a good question. I think it might have just been that year that they that was a really good year. They're still up high and you're on a slope. So they're still kind of in the sagebrush and in a relatively dry habitat. They're not along the creek. Any other?
I just remember them being on slopes. I remember having to climb up kind of slope on that.
Yeah.
And it was I was really excited because I thought I found gold. And you walk along this one area, it's like, well, they didn't mind there. That was one thing, but
Oh, right.
wow, this is really shiny out here. And I'm coming back, I'm gonna get really rich. Never got back, but anyways, I just remember those slopes,
Yeah.
particular interest.
Yeah. I think where you find them, it's hard to sort of zone in on what is particular. There isn't something that's really distinctive, which has made it kind of challenging to search for it because if it had a particular edaphic association or we do look for it on particular slopes, but I've seen it on relatively flat areas as well. Makes it kind of mysterious, hard to pinpoint. Okay, so this is what happened in, what year was that? I think it was 21. I'm sorry, I don't have a date associated. So this is a quote out of the most recent conservation plan put out by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I think it was 21. So let me give you some backstory. In 2010, this skiff milk veg was put on the list to be considered for listing. So research was done. The U.S. Forest Service collected input from various agencies and such. And I think it was in 2021 that they made the decision not to list it. So this is, what they specifically said. They say we found that the species' current viability is characterized by persistence on the landscape as a narrow endemic species with a stable population size. Not exactly sure how they could determine that for sure. A lack of stressors other than drought and climate change. We're also worried about cheatgrass. And protections in place on BLM lands. Therefore, we find that listing the skiff milk veg as an endangered species or threatened species under the Act is not warranted. So that was the latest decision regarding its status. Okay, so I mentioned the Denver Botanical, getting on there. the Denver Botanic Gardens demographic study, and I definitely wanted to shout out to Michelle DePregner-Levin, who has led this demographic study for the last 25 years and quantified the high year-to-year variability and these big years, which are referred to as massed years, where they produce a ton of flowers and have high reproductive years, followed by periods, years even of dormancy, right, where the plants appear to just disappear, you know, they're underground, and then get another good year, and then they reoccur. So they've been able to track that. So 25 years, that's a long time. Tracking a plant. And this is the work that my graduate student, Bronwyn Taylor, did. These were some of the questions we were asking. We were interested in quantifying the reproductive success of the plant. No one has done any pollination biology, so we wanted to take a look at that. We were interested in herbivory and seed predation, trying to quantify whether there was that. There has also been no work done on seed bank. So what's going on in the soil? Do the seeds persist over time? Because that could be really an important conservation consideration. If you've got seeds in the soil to replenish, or do they not last? Do they get eaten? You know, do they lose viability? And then just some broad community characteristics. So those are the things. That was a lot for an MS thesis, by the way. That was a lot. So these are just some numbers, and you've got 2 years there. So 2019 and 2020, and 2019 was a really, really good year. So these are 5 different sites out at Hartman's, and these are the number of plants that she found, marked, and then, you know, tracked. So there were a lot that year. But then the next year, which was bad for all of us, including milk vetch, was much less. So you can see how I don't have numbers for those first 4 sites from 2020, but I do have densities, and you can see how they pretty dramatically decrease. So that's an example of we had a great year, really remarkable, followed by a really bad. And it had to do with snow. So these are flowers that we counted, basically, again, between 2019 and 2020. Remarkable difference. So these are our sites out at Hartman's. You got Dirty South, anybody can mountain bike? Yeah, so you know that one. So we had a couple out there. And so, you know, what you're seeing is this is the median number of flower clusters. And we know that the cluster of flowers is correlated with how many fruits there is. And so by looking at how many racemes there are, you have an idea of their reproduction. And just the difference between the 2 years, again, is really dramatic. So these are fruit to flower ratios, which is kind of interesting, right? So this tells you for every flower, how many fruits do you get, right? And what you'll see is that it's only around a quarter. Right? So you know, you only get 1 fruit for every 4 flowers, basically. So. And this was in 2019, so this was a good year. But you've got a lot of extra flowers and relatively few end up setting fruit. Now that may not be a bad thing. You have lots of flowers that can serve to attract pollinators. So it can just be part of the display. And, so maybe that relatively low fruit production is normal. It's a strategy that the plant has. We did find a lot of herbivory, especially in 2019. In fact, the rabbits like decimated all of our research points. And so it was a very difficult year. Not only were there fewer plants, but the plants that we had ended up all getting munched by rabbits. And we determined that they were rabbits because rabbits have a particular way that they cut the stems. It has this distinctive diagonal cut. It's characteristic of Legomorphs of rabbits. And then my Bronwyn set up some game cameras and caught them in the act. So this guy is a little hard to tell, but he actually has a microcybus in his mouth. So we just confirmed that rabbit herbivory is pretty extensive. And can have a huge impact on these populations. This is quantifying rabbit herbivory because it mostly was rabbits. And so these are 5 different sites, and it's just giving you an idea of how herbivory changed over the year, right? So these are collecting periods from early in the year to later in the summer. And you can see how it just built until there were almost no plants left. We were all punched. So. And this is a lot of numbers, I know. I decided to just go ahead and throw it in there anyway. We tried to do some pollinator exclusion studies where we put bags over flowers to see if the plants could set fruit without a pollinator. Right, to see if they can self-pollinate. And the take-home message is basically no, they were unable to. The study wasn't really successful, so our sample size was kind of small. But what you can see, a few different years. So these are the number of flowers that were bagged, and then the numbers of fruits we got. Right, so we did get some. Those fruits that we got had very low seed set though, and we weren't able to actually do any viability tests on those seeds. So that is more work that would be really great to get out there and do. That'll kind of make sense. Oops. So here, these are pictures Bronwyn took of pollinators. And I think it's just really wonderful to take a moment to look at these. These are all solitary bee species. So they're quite small, which makes sense. The flowers are tiny. And they don't live in big colonies. So they're solitary. So the Anthidium is one. Ash mediella, another one. These are pretty remarkable pictures. Also gives you a really nice idea of the plant. Botrytis, they all kind of look the same. We had to send them off to a specialist to get ID'd. Oh, and then a few guys stuck on pins because didn't get pictures of them in the field. Lasioglossum and Ceratina. I think those are the last. So these are ground nesting bees, solitary bees, and so any impact that alters, the habitat is likely to have an impact on these pollinators, and it is suggestive that the plant really needs pollinators in order to set seed. So we did do a little bit of a seed bank study. And I'll try to wrap it up here pretty quick because I know it's getting late. These are soil samples that Bronwyn took right at the plant half a meter from the plant and a meter from the plant. And then she quantified how many seeds she got in the soil. And so this is basically a measure of dispersal. And what you see is that they don't go very far. Most of the seeds end up right under the plant. So these are gravity dispersed. They don't have any kind of animal dispersal happening. They probably disperse a little bit downslope just through, rainwater and, other sorts of things like that that are going to help them just sort of creep down slope. So anyway, we got a little bit of information about what's going on in the seed bank. And it persists. So this is the seed bank at different distances. Again, this is closest to the parent plant. In November to the following June. Right, so that's what's really important is how many seeds are persisting in the seed bank through the year. So there were some, so that is interesting. This is before the flowers set seed in that year. Remember, 2020 was kind of a bad year, so the new seed bank was relatively low. What went into the seed bank in 2020?
How big are the seeds?
Let's see. They're tiny. So those, like a couple millimeters. They're quite small. Maybe 3 millimeters. They're pretty tiny, and they have to be scarified in order to germinate. So you have to rub them with sandpaper if you want to try to plant them, which we did, and we grew them successfully, and we gave them to the Denver Botanic Garden. So our plants are down there, but it is possible to do. So we should talk. Yeah. And they were viable. So we did the seeds that we got out of the soil. We tested for viability, and then those were some of the seeds that we actually grew up. So that was pretty successful. 78 to average viability was 78% seed in the soil.
How is that scarification, I guess, happening naturally?
So it's that's a great question. It could be time. All right, so exposure, through a winter or two, with precipitation and associated chemical changes in the seed coat. It probably isn't really, some seeds get scarified when they're tossed they dispersed by water through a creek or something. I don't think that's really happening. So I think it's probably more of a time, chemical changes over time with precipitation and that sort of leaching. It's a good question too. And there's some really cool things you can do with the seed bank study where you track your seeds from year to year, and you can test them for viability multiple years. Put enough in there that you can test them 1 year and then pull out some more and test them the next year and so on. So there's some really cool seed bank studies that could be done. Anyway, so this is my last slide. Those are the stars of the show. And I think we just all need to be aware of challenges that the plants have with the growing recreation pressures and grazing management, and of course, changing climate is challenging for all of us. So recruiting people to get out there and do more work, getting more grad students to get out there and do more work, getting volunteers to get out there and track these plants and find these populations is what we need. So anyway, that is all I have.
Appreciate it. Are there any other questions? And do we have questions from the, yeah.
Yeah, we can ask this anytime, so you can ask any questions.
We really
Bring that
appreciate it.
over to you.
In the meantime, I know spring break's coming up. If any of you are down at San Miguel River, Forest River, there's an Astragalus down there, Cisciflorus, that's found on sandstone. Little crevices and things like that. I would love to see if anybody finds more of those. Found it a long time ago, send it into Weather, send to Barnaby, and he identified it from this little squiggly thing. So if anybody can find that again, I would just, I would love it.
What's it called?
Cisciflorus. And it's, you know how Weber changed everything?
Yeah.
I still think it's an acronym and I still think it's Cisciflorus, but
Okay.
head on down there, it's really cool. And go to a place called Soma Basin, right? You won't find the trailhead unless you look. Any questions?
Any questions from the Zoom participants? So, go ahead. So both of these are found in Hartford.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, but Anissa's like up by Signal Peak, there's a ton out behind campus, there's a ton on those trails. But also on the curtains.
There was a question.
There was a question.
Have any of the seeds been sent to a larger seed bank?
No, that's a great, I think that is something I should double check on whether we send any seeds to Denver. I think we did, but not a bigger one. But that would be an important thing to do. Sure. But then at the same time, it's like, you don't want to take seeds, right? In terms of the population. Health and science, kind of a trade-off.
So if you see them, do you, like the cheat map where you take a picture and send it in so they can document the cheat process? Do you all have something like that going for the millfish?
Well, I think iNaturalist probably, if you're familiar with that, I haven't used it a lot. But I believe that's one way that those recordings of observations are they keep track of it, I think, through the heritage program. I think they're tuned into that, but I'm not entirely.
So you need the app.
Yeah. iNaturalist. Anybody use it?
The website. Any other questions? Again, thank you so much. Before you all leave and to address your question, July 7th, Maggie Gaddis is going to come out here and take us up to Crested Butte, go look out in the field, take pictures, use iNaturalist, learn how to use it, come back into someplace inside and take a look at some plants that we have. So that's something that we'll have organized. I think it's already has an event, July 7th. Happening 9 to 12, and we'll be meeting up in Crested Butte. It's associated kind of with the Crested Butte Wildflower Festival. And then I wanted to mention two other events that are coming up. April 14th here, land conversion. Jenny DeMarco will be helping us with that, as well as Gay Austin will be talking about starting seeds and planting native gardens. And that's one popular. I'm hoping to get this place dirty, but don't tell the lie. And then also June 21st, Sagebrush Beauties. And this is an event that's kind of associated with Crested Butte Wildflower Festival. We're going up to Almont Triangle, hike up to the peacock tree, come across and down. It is a great, you're going to be hopping and popping going up. Then come down, and then you come down with a single track. And hopefully, who knows what's going to happen this spring.
Yeah.
It could be really dry. There's some years it can be absolutely. So that's pretty much what's coming up. Two most recent events will be on events on the Colorado Native Plant Society website under events. And July 7th one is Here's another one that's really cool. July 26th, we're gonna hike from the top of Splungullion Slide all the way down through this special state site and identify plants there. We don't know if there are any endemics, rares, or whatnot. That's in the planning right now. So that's another one. I'm hoping to have kind of monthly meetings, but May is up for grabs. If you do monthly meetings, it will be the second Monday of the month. We'll try to do that. I can't always get that going, but at least I'll just keep you informed. And any other questions about Gunnison Basin chapter? I'm so grateful you're here. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Well, there was, there's eight.
That would be, yeah.
Okay.
I should have been. Perfect. Thank you all for coming.
Well,